Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Extremely excited to record today's video, and I know this is going to be a video that a lot of people enjoy. This is meant to be a thought-provoking exercise of what potential trades we could see in the NBA during the 2024 NBA Draft Night. I'm extremely excited for it because, as you all know, NBA Draft Night trades can really shake up the NBA. You know, I had to get a picture here of the Luka Doncic and Atlanta Hawks hat up in this video as a Mavericks fan myself. Just had to do a little callback to draft night in 2018. But let's get into some of those 2024 NBA Draft Night trades here. Of course, presented by Utility Sports. We have 8 potential 2024 NBA Draft Night trades. Now, important note, these are frameworks. This is not a, hey, this is the exact deal down to the wire. You could argue maybe a second rounder, a couple of extra second rounders have to be in there. These are maybe like starting points in offers and deals. For those of you who don't know, NBA trades take a long time to come together. It's not just, hey, give this GM a call, say a couple of words, give them an offer, and then all of a sudden you have a done deal. There's a lot of pre-existing relationships that go into trades. So these are kind of like starting points in deals where teams would float, hey, maybe we'll be willing to give you this. And over time, deals just kind of come together. So I'm giving kind of starting points or just overall generic skeleton frameworks for what a deal could potentially look like. An important note here, to get something, you have to give up something else. So there's a lot of fans that typically comment saying, we don't want to give this guy up. Yeah, that's usually the case. If you're making a big trade for somebody, you typically don't want to give up a ton back either, but that's just not how the NBA works. To get something, you must give something up, just the way that NBA trades work. And that's why it's really hard to build a team solely through making trades, because you're really reliant on getting good deals and making things happen when other teams are obviously looking for something in return. Some teams may look to move up or down in the draft depending on their situation. So we're gonna have a couple of trades regarding just solely draft picks. We're gonna have a couple of trades for veteran players. This video is kind of all encompassing to potential trades we could see. And then financial impact matters too. We're gonna talk about that just a little bit in this video. Remember last year, the Oklahoma City Thunder moved from 12 up to 10, took on Davis Bertans' contract to help out the Mavericks last draft. As a result, they got to move up a couple of spots. Sacramento and Dallas last year also made a swap where the Mavs took Richaun Holmes' contract and the Kings moved their first round pick completely out of pick 24. That became Max Prosper there in Dallas. So remember, financial impact matters. The luxury tax, especially with the new CBA, very punitive. So some teams might look to avoid that or work around that in some ways. So we will talk about finances a bit. If you guys do enjoy this video overall, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let's get into it here with trade number 1, and it's between the Orlando Magic and Portland Trailblazers. I'm sure Magic fans would be ecstatic to see Anthony Simons there in Orlando. I think the main talking point here for Orlando is getting a shot-creating, ball-handling, capable half-court shot-creating guard in the mix, and that is Anthony Simons, someone who is native to the area. I think would be very welcome to returning back to Orlando and becoming the Magic's starting point guard. He would be a significant and steady upgrade at the position over Markelle Fultz, over Cole Anthony, over Anthony Black, over all of the collection of guards Orlando currently has. Anthony Simons would be head and shoulders better than any of them, especially with what Orlando needs, which is someone who is a capable spot-up shooter when either Banchero or Franz Wagner are the initiators for the offense, but also someone who, like I said, can really create his own shot. And that's something Anthony Simons over the last couple of years has really taken massive strides in. He's one of the better pull-up shooters in the NBA, a ton of three-point volume. He has deep range to him, and he's a very good pick-and-roll ball handler when it comes to creating for himself. And I think with Orlando specifically, with Wendell Carter Jr. there, you could form a really dynamic pick-and-pop game that would be really dangerous against some of the drop coverage teams in the Eastern Conference. You think about facing the Boston Celtics, facing the Milwaukee Bucks, facing some of those teams. Having Simons being a pull-up jump shooter out of those looks would be super valuable for Orlando. And from the Blazers' perspective, giving up on Simons is extremely difficult. That's a tough decision and one that isn't going to come easily. But this is a really good haul, in my opinion, for Simons. You're getting Anthony Black, who was a very well-regarded pick last year in the draft. I had him number 5 on my 2023 NBA draft big board, I believe. I'm a big believer in his game, and I think as a rookie showcased a lot of his talent, especially on the defensive end of the floor. But he actually surprisingly shot the ball relatively well from 3. Now, he doesn't have a ton of scoring gravity, but I think if you're looking for another guard who could coexist in the backcourt along Scoot Henderson, you're looking for a guard who has natural positional size, defensive upside, and Anthony Black checks both of those boxes, even back to his time at Arkansas, playing next to Nick Smith Jr. as kind of a combo guard, offense initiator at times, but also playing off the ball as a cutter. And with his improved three-point percentage, maybe he's able to sustain that going forward in his career. That would be fantastic for him as an overall player. He becomes a key piece for the Blazers in this trade. You also get pick number 18 in this year's draft, a 2025 first rounder. So in totality, you're getting 2 firsts, a player who was just drafted in the first very, very high last year, and 2 second-round picks. Now, again, this is the skeleton framework, so I'm sure some Blazers fans are already commenting saying, we want way more for Anthony Simons than just this package. Well, this is where the framework matters, right? Maybe Orlando throws in another player, or maybe Orlando would work in another piece or two into this trade, whether that's a few more second-rounders, maybe one more first-rounder down the road. Orlando has a lot of flexibility. That's one of the beautiful things about this trade for them specifically as well. If they did make a trade like this where they give up Anthony Black, who's already, you know, a used asset at this point from a trade perspective, he doesn't affect the Stepien role by trading him. Trading this year's first and Denver's first doesn't hurt you at all. You go into next year still with all of the trade flexibility in the world because you have control of your own future first-round picks. So this is a huge home run for Orlando, in my opinion. Portland could maybe do a little bit better. That's where, again, seeing some more assets in there. I know people are going to comment, this trade sucks, or this, people are going to hate on everything I say here. But to give something up, you have to get something back in return, and vice versa. Portland here does get something back that I do like. I like Anthony Black's game. I do think he would be a pretty strong fit next to Scoot Henderson from a size and length profile. And then also just looking at the draft assets coming back, they're not getting nothing for Anthony Simons. They're actually getting a pretty good return. And even though I like Simons a lot, he's no Damian Lillard. So with that in mind, I think just considering the fact that you're not going to get 4 or 5 first-round picks for Simons, getting 2 firsts and a former lottery pick in Black, I think is a pretty decent starting point to trade discussions. Trade number 2, look at my jersey swap skills here, guys. Luke Kennard goes back to Detroit, as well as pick number 9 and a 2030 second rounder via the Dallas Mavericks. And the Memphis Grizzlies shave a little bit of salary. I do think that will be important for them this offseason with all of their contracts on the book. They give up Luke Kennard on his team option. They take back Troy Brown Jr., so they replace Kennard's shooting with a lesser shooter, a lesser skilled overall player in Troy Brown Jr., who can't handle as much, but he can catch fire from deep. And you move up in the draft specifically for UConn center Donovan Clingan. This is in the scenario in which Clingan falls to being available 5th overall in the draft. There's a real chance he goes in the top 2 or 4 picks. There is reality here where maybe Clingan doesn't even make it all the way to pick number 5. But in the event that he does, I could see Memphis aggressively targeting him, being willing to move up from pick number 9. They excise a rotation player here in Luke Kennard, who returns to the Pistons. And the Grizzlies get their franchise center, their real anchor around Jaren Jackson Jr. Not only do you have an elite shot blocker then in Jaren Jackson Jr., but you also have a player like Donovan Clingan who can hold down the board, set fantastic screens, pass out of the top of the key, kind of as a hub of the offense type of facilitating big man, and then also just be a true drop coverage, rim deterrent, rim anchor for a team that needs it, while still being a great rebounder. Standing at 7'2", he's huge, mobile, massive, and really, really, really talented as well. And for the Pistons, you might say, well, why are they passing up on that opportunity? First of all, 5th overall, it already feels a little funky when I'm mocking picks for them 5th overall, because there's players I like for them, but I'm not sure if they're even going to be available, like Rob Dillingham or Reed Shepherd. And even then, I'm not sure if the Pistons have the ability or the willingness to take them, given the fact that they've spent picks on the past in Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham. Their backcourt already feels kind of full, especially with the Marcus Sasser selection last year. So with that in mind, they might just settle on a guy like Matas Buzelis anyway. And I think that there's a real chance Buzelis can maybe be available 9th overall with some of his flaws, the lack of a quick first step, the lack of reliable three-point shooting. I think Matas Buzelis is still a little bit of a project player himself. He's extremely young, was a very high-end recruit, so he has potential to work into. He's got great positional size, some versatility on both ends of the floor. He can handle the ball a bit. There's a lot to work with, but there's also a lot to build on. So I think for Buzelis, getting him 9th overall instead of 5th overall still makes a good deal of sense for the Pistons. And with that, you use some of your cap space to bring in a guy like Luke Kennard, who already the Pistons fans know extremely well, he is a sniper, one of the best three-point shooters in the league. Now, he doesn't have the highest volume. He's not the most assertive player in the league, but I think next to Cade Cunningham, next to Jaden Ivey, next to Jalen Duren, the more spacing you can add, the better. Luke Kennard is a no-brainer, surefire fit into their lineup and their roster. I think he makes a good deal of sense, and you might still get the same prospect 9th overall that you were going to take 5th overall, whereas the Grizzlies probably would not get Donovan Clingan if they stick at pick number 9. Trade number 3, we look at one of my favorite deals to talk about, and I have loved this composition for about a year now, where the Cavaliers, they just haven't really meshed the way that people have hoped. And I think the biggest reason why is Evan Mobley is probably more suited to play center as a face-up big man with his skill set, his kind of fluidity and mobility, probably gets maximized as a center like Chet Holmgren has been in Oklahoma City, like Victor Wembanyama was for the second half of his rookie year in San Antonio. I think the Cavs at some point will move Evan Mobley to center, which means Jarrett Allen is going to get traded, more than likely. And if he's getting traded somewhere, I think the best fit for him is New Orleans. So in this deal, the Pelicans get Jarrett Allen, they get Craig Porter Jr., who had actually a pretty solid year this past year, kind of an under-the-radar name, someone that is important to keep our eyes on, and they move up 1 pick in the draft. It's a tiny little detail, but they move up from pick number 21 up to pick number 20. So they swap places here with the Cavaliers, and the Cavs, in return for their all-star level big man, get Herb Jones, one of the best defenders in the world, was just named All-NBA Defense First Team. Very, very well-deserved. I had him on my All-Defense First Team this year with the way that I would have voted had I had to vote for the award. Larry Nance Jr. returns back to the land as well, former Cleveland backup big man, kind of returns back in that role. So while you're making the move of turning Evan Mobley into your center, you are getting someone with real center experience behind him to back him up. You don't really hurt your front court depth this way if you're Cleveland. Now, you do move down 1 spot in the draft, but I think you're okay with taking that risk, especially with this year's draft class quality. There's a lot of players who are very similar level players across the board. So for the same reason I had the Pistons willing to move down from pick 5 to pick 9, I think the Cavaliers are willing to move down 1 spot here to get this deal to go through. They get Herb Jones. They have one of the best wing defensive combos now in the NBA with Herb Jones and Isaac Okoro. That is freakishly good defense. I think Herb Jones really slots in perfectly as a power forward in the NBA. If you think back to his college time at Alabama, he was playing center for the Crimson Tide a ton. He has playmaking capabilities that I still think are underexplored in the NBA, but he's obviously turned into one of the pinnacle 3-and-D players in the league with the ability to attack closeouts as well, make plays at the rim, and then defensively one of the best playmakers in the world. Cleveland really cements themselves as one of the best defensive front courts with Okoro, Herb Jones, and Evan Mobley. That is a freakish trio. You can run basically any concept, any scheme in the world that you want. It gives JB Bickerstaff, or whoever that next Cavs coach is, a ton of flexibility going into next season, regardless of what happens with the backcourt between Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. And then for the Pelicans, I just raved about how Herb Jones helps the Cleveland Cavaliers. Jarrett Allen helps the Pelicans just as much, if not more. Yes, you do sacrifice a little bit of depth here, giving up 2 rotation players in Herb Jones and Larry Nance Jr., but you significantly upgrade your starting center spot from Jonas Valanciunas, who's maybe, the 25th, 27th best starting center in the league, to a top 10 center in the world in Jarrett Allen, who, even though when you watch him, his game doesn't just stand out as like a, wow, look at this all-star caliber big man, but all of the little things do. He's a fantastic screen setter. I think that's really important in New Orleans with their zoom offense, having someone who is capable of handling the ball a little bit on the perimeter. He's comfortable with the rock in his hands and flowing into dribble handoffs. I think his screen setting will create a little bit more space for CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram. And then one thing that Jarrett Allen does way better than Jonas Valanciunas is he rolls to the rim extremely quickly and hard. And you might say, okay, why is that super important? With the way teams at times want to defend New Orleans, which is playing in that drop coverage a little bit and sagging off of their center on the perimeter, Valanciunas' slow rolls doesn't really hurt a defense, whereas Allen, who can get downhill extremely quickly, probably creates more downhill space for Ingram and McCollum most specifically to work, but also creates some of those downhill opportunities for Zion Williamson, because Allen, I think, has an underrated mid-range game, an underrated floater to work on as well. He sits in the pocket pretty well, so I think for New Orleans, putting Jared Allen next to Zion Williamson. I know Pelicans fans are going to scream saying, oh my gosh, you don't think a shooting big man would be better? Listen, it's great to have a shooting big man, but not every shooting big man, first of all, works very well in the NBA because they're usually giving something up in return. But then also, you're not exerting as much rim pressure around your mid-range creators. So I think someone like Jared Allen really kind of moves the needle for New Orleans in a way that some of these other options that will become available don't. So I think the Pelicans pursuing Jared Allen, even if it costs Herb Jones, it makes sense because you have Trey Murphy III ready to steal that starting spot of Herb Jones anyway. And I think the Pelicans become one of the most dangerous offenses in the NBA in short order. Trade number 4, and this is a 3-team deal, one I am extremely excited about. I think this is a home run for the Sacramento Kings. I think it makes a lot of long-term sense for Atlanta, and this is Toronto maximizing on a expiring contract. The Raptors have Bruce Brown for one final season now, $23 million in expiring contract that they could look to trade, and there's a lot of optimism and belief that the Raptors will trade him before or on NBA draft night, and I think this is one of the deals that makes the most sense out there. The Kings get Bruce Brown and his services. The Kings are likely going to lose Malik Monk. They have a huge hole in their backcourt that they're going to look to fill, and Bruce Brown's one of the best gap fillers in the entire NBA with his very versatile skill set, can handle the ball, can defend on and off the basketball, also has slowly but surely continued to improve as a shooter throughout his entire career. And honestly, one of the better short rollers, one of the better cutters in the league. I think he would have a tremendous fit with Domantas Sabonis there in Sacramento, just like he did with Nikola Jokic in Denver, two of the best passing big men in the world. I think Bruce Brown would be a tremendous fit in Sacramento. What do the Raptors get for him? They get a collection of expiring contracts. Trey Lyles, who I think could really play a role for them as a floor spacing big man. This gives them a little bit more depth in their front court. Of course, they have Jakob Poeltl, they have Kelly Olynyk, but now they have a third front court member who's very reliable here, and Trey Lyles has been an awesome player for the Kings the last couple of years. You get Sasha Vezenkov here as well, another movable contract, a couple of years left on that deal. The Raptors could look to reroute him later. And Chris Duarte, a big part of this is just matching the money here. To get close to that Bruce Brown $23 million mark, you have to take some contracts back in. Sacramento views Duarte, Vezenkov as movable. Giving up Trey Lyles definitely does hurt a little bit, but I do think it makes sense. Also in this deal, you get a protected, 2025 first-round pick from the Sacramento Kings, but it comes actually from the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks have control of that pick right now. It was lottery protected this year, but since the Kings missed the playoffs, that pick got pushed back to next year and beyond. So that pick will not be in this year's draft, of course, but it will at earliest be in 2025, and the highest that pick can be is pick 15. Whereas now the Hawks, why do they give up that pick? Well, they get a couple of things in return. They give up that pick and DeAndre Hunter, who has a lot of money owed to him after the Hawks got the first overall pick. It's very possible they could land on Zachary Rissachet from France as the #1 overall pick. In this situation, that is what I'm making somewhat of an assumption on. Otherwise, it could be Alex Sarr. Either way, they're going to add a front court player. DeAndre Hunter, with his contract that he's owed, probably a movable contract for the Hawks and one that they would not mind getting off of, given the fact that they are in the aprons with how they're currently sitting. So shaving off some long-term money could be very beneficial for them, just like we saw them do last year with John Collins. And I think they get pretty good return here. They move that pick next year up to this year. That Kings pick this season, number 13th overall, now goes to Atlanta. So instead of getting a non-lottery pick from the Kings, they actually move up to a lottery pick this year. They already have pick number 1. They now also would get pick number 13, giving them 2 lottery picks in this year's draft to have a real chance at restarting this organization a little bit, resetting the tables around Trae Young and for Quinn Snyder to work with. They get Harrison Barnes in here too. Again, they make the downgrade from DeAndre Hunter to Harrison Barnes. That's why the Kings, it makes a lot of sense for them. They get a big forward who has versatility, can shoot the ball a bit, but can also put it on the deck. He's just a flat-out better athlete, better player than Harrison Barnes at this point, and Bruce Brown's a great fit in Sacramento. And then for the Hawks, specifically, downgrading to Harrison Barnes, I think is worth picking up a lottery pick in this year's draft. You also get an upside swing here on guard Davion Mitchell, who's a former lottery pick himself, just hasn't really found his rhythm in the league. The Kings obviously went to Keon Ellis as a starter for them down the stretch of the season with some of the injuries that they had. Keon Ellis, I think, really cemented himself as a key piece of the Kings rotation over the next couple of years. So because of that, Davion Mitchell and his $6 million contract becomes a lot more movable for the Kings. I think there's a real willingness to trade him. And especially if they're getting two rotation pieces like this and Bruce Brown, DeAndre Hunter, I think this is the best the Kings could do this offseason. Obviously, you could consider something like Kyle Kuzma as well from Washington. We'll talk about the Wizards later in this one, but I'm extremely excited. And for the Raptors, obviously, you know, you're getting a collection of pieces. You're getting a future first-round pick for an expiring contract. I think that makes sense. And then from Atlanta's perspective, again, you're getting off of DeAndre Hunter's long-term money given their cap space situation. You're trading a future pick for a pick this year that gives you one more lottery pick in a draft where the talent's pretty flat across the board. Getting someone 13th overall, I think, could be a huge help for them. Could be someone like Jared McCain. Could be a few different players that make a good deal of sense. So overall, I think this three-team composition really does work well for all parties involved. The Kings make a win now move. The Raptors load themselves up with a future pick, and the Hawks add to their #1 pick in this year's draft with another lottery pick as well. Trade number 5. This is one that comes almost exactly from my Houston Rockets draft night trades video, but with a slight adjustment. A lot of the comments in there were saying, is Mikal Bridges' value really that low? And I thought for a second, maybe it is. You're getting pick number 3 and Dillon Brooks. The way I look at it, Dillon Brooks is a very good player in the NBA. Obviously, people last year got really low on him. When he signed his 4-year contract with Houston, I said it was a good move for the Rockets. Almost everyone disagreed with me. Well, he helped the Rockets a ton this year. Their defense took a huge step forward. They won basically double the games they did a year ago. Dillon Brooks was a key part of that. So I think he is a quality player, but I do ultimately agree with the comments that people were leaving that maybe the value was just a little too low. So the Nets also, with the 3rd overall pick and Dillon Brooks, they also get a swap back on 2027. They already owe their swap out to the Houston Rockets for the 2027 draft. They get some of that flexibility back. The Rockets give up or concede that 2027 swap right. So it's not a lot more value in this deal, but it is a bit more to help Brooklyn kind of swallow the pill and kind of bite the bullet on that James Harden trade. And Mikal Bridges goes to Houston, instantly helps them become a playoff team. I think the Rockets are really close as it is to becoming a postseason team. Another step forward from Şengün, another step forward from Jalen Green, and the Rockets are probably already there. Not to mention Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore's development. Jabari Smith can maybe take another step forward as a shot maker. They're really trending in the right direction. I think stepping on the gas a little bit, making a small upgrade, but a meaningful upgrade to Mikal Bridges, who's just a much better offensive player than Dillon Brooks with the similar defensive impact. I think Mikal Bridges would be a really great get for Houston, and I think for Brooklyn, you could position yourself to maybe take a franchise point guard in this year's draft. Could be Stephon Castle, could be Nikola Topic, could be maybe even a Rob Dillingham or a Reed Shepherd, depending on what the Nets want to do, 3rd overall. But I think a bunch of different options out there make sense for Brooklyn. They have a lot of long-term questions, so this could be the start of their rebuild, while also still getting a wing in Dillon Brooks who could help their defense and keep them semi-competitive right now, while they owe more future picks out the door. Trade number 6, and this is an important one to talk about. I've had a lot of comments asking about sign and trade deals for Paul George. Well, this is not a sign and trade. This is a draft night trade, and this would be very similar to the trade last year between the Washington Wizards and Boston Celtics, where Porzingis opted into his player option and then later extended with the Celtics after being traded. So he opted in with the Wizards under the idea that he would be traded. He had been guaranteed a trade. This would be the exact same situation. Paul George has a $48.7 million trade or player option for this year, and you might say, okay, so he opts into that final year of the contract, and then what's the expectation for the Clippers? Why would they help him out by trading him? Well, it's really a twofold answer here. If the Clippers are worried about Paul George leaving, which isn't a guarantee, in fact, I think there's a good chance Paul George just does stay with the Los Angeles Clippers this offseason, but in the event that they are worried about him leaving, they could work with his agency, his camp, to get him where he wants to go. And Philadelphia, who has cap space, could pull this trade off on draft night where they send the 16th overall pick to LA, as well as the 2028 first rounder that they owe the Sixers as well, back to the Clippers. So The Clippers get some of their own flexibility back. Obviously, the 2028 first was from the James Harden trade. They're able to reverse engineer that a little bit, regain some of their trade flexibility themselves, get a pick in this year's draft that could either help them find a young identity piece in this year's class just outside of the lottery, or they could also look to trade that pick to another team, try and make a meaningful upgrade on their roster, while the 76ers guarantee themselves the third star in their big three alongside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. PG-13 would be a fantastic fit in there. Philadelphia would be one of the best landing spots for him if he does leave. And I have one really important note. Not only do the Clippers get themselves out of the luxury tax completely here, this would give them the ability to actually go out and use a non-taxpayer mid-level exception for the first time in a long time. It gives the Clippers the ability to maybe make a meaningful upgrade on the roster using that non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And I think the most important part, doing this type of trade where he opts into his contract, gets traded, and then later extends with Philadelphia, the Clippers here in this situation get a near $49 million trade exception. So instead of letting him walk for nothing, losing him entirely, and not really gaining any advantage, you trade him, you get draft picks, but you also, in this scenario, get a huge trade exception. You maximize your leverage and your flexibility by using Philadelphia's cap space, and now you can go back out in future trades, break up that $49 million trade exception, and use some of these picks in other trades to improve your roster, get meaningful pieces on your team around James Harden, Kawhi Leonard. You reconfigure the roster and maybe add some more depth, some more consistent players in your rotation, especially think playoff time. They had to play Amir Coffey a ton, who just really struggled in the postseason. He's not a postseason player, not a 16-game guy. If you can add 2 or 3 meaningful players into your roster using that $49 million, yes, you're going to miss Paul George, but you're going to be able to restock your cupboard with players who fit around Harden and Kawhi Leonard, and then maybe you still have a chance in the postseason if Kawhi's ever healthy at the right time. Trade number 7, and this is a fun one here, between the Washington Wizards and Oklahoma City Thunder. It just feels like Josh Giddey has played his last game in OKC. There's reports right now from The Athletic saying that Josh Giddey might get traded this offseason, that in fact OKC might be shopping him presently. That is a real possibility given how the postseason went for Giddey. Obviously, just a tough year from a PR perspective. Obviously, had some off-the-court stuff that he was dealing with. You all know what I'm talking about. Not a good last 12 months for Josh Giddey in any stretch of the imagination. And I really think he is one of the players that needs the biggest change of scenery in the entire NBA. Not only with the off-the-court stuff, but on the court as well. I think we can all agree Josh Giddey's the type of player who would be better with the ball in his hands and playing with a rhythm far more frequently. And even though teams might tag off of him if you're using him as a primary ball handler, I think that actually maximizes his talent as a passer. If you sag off of him, you're opening up a ton of different passing windows. He could really orchestrate and run an offense, and the Wizards right now just do not have a true franchise point guard. Now, I'm not saying Josh Giddey would be that for them, but he would be at least a stopgap at the position. Jordan Poole has taken some of those point guard responsibilities, but the Wizards, who do need to be looking at guys who could maybe provide some upside for them. Josh Giddey is someone who could maybe grow into that former top 10 pick back in the 2020 NBA draft. I believe maybe 2020 NBA draft, I'm pretty certain. And just honestly is a player who I think could make a really good deal of sense around this cast and this unit right now in Washington, as a player who would have the ball in his hands, create some offense for them, and just probably find more of a rhythm. You also get Ousmane Dieng here. If you're Washington, he's a high upside wing coming out of his draft class. I like Dieng's game a lot as someone who could create off the dribble and really make plays for himself with his size and length. Now, we haven't gotten to see him a ton in the NBA, but he has been productive in the G League, which is important. You also get pick number 12 in this year's draft. If you're Washington, a team that's been reportedly interested in adding a third first-round pick, you would then have picks number 2, 12, and 26 in this year's draft. Maybe that turns into a guy like Cody Williams. Maybe that turns into a Dalton Connect. There's a few players in this draft that could make a good deal of sense. Maybe that's where they get their starting center in Khalil Ware, possibly at pick number 12. Maybe even a guy like Zach Edey or Day'Ron Holmes II could make some sense later in the draft as well. You never know what Washington would do, but this would really increase their flexibility in this year's class. And OKC gets a player who really helps them right now. Kyle Kuzma, someone who I think positionally is a pretty strong and solid rebounder, especially on the defensive glass. One of the biggest things with OKC this year that they really struggled with was just ending defensive possessions. I think for the most part have a very good defensive team with individual talents defensively. Chet Holmgren projects to be one of the best defenders in the league over the next 7 to 10 years. SGA is a big-time defensive playmaker, does a lot of things well at both on and off the basketball, has one of the best pickpocket rates in the NBA, it seems like. J-Dub just seems to make plays in the passing lanes as well. He's a good defender. Mark Daigneault really relied on him to guard across multiple positions this year. If he's playing Minnesota, he's guarding Karl Anthony Towns. But if you're playing against a smaller team, he's guarding point guards, he's guarding shooting guards. So he really did a lot of different things for OKC throughout the year on a matchup, night-to-night basis. I just think that the Thunder need a little bit more size. Now, people have been saying, oh, well, they could use a real center and maybe move Chet Holmgren to the 4. No, that is not happening. You're completely missing the point if you believe that. OKC is not looking for a true inside center. They're not looking for a non-shooting big man. They want big wings around Chet Holmgren at center. And I think with that, someone like Kyle Kuzma, who is capable of beating his guy off the bounce, making plays with a live handle, and of course shooting the ball as well. We've seen him in big-time scenarios. Think back to his time with the Lakers. Kyle Kuzma has been a quality NBA player for a while now. He's not a savior. He's not stepping in and solving all of OKC's problems here, but I do think he steps in and at least helps in a lot of the ways with them without sacrificing their overall team construct and team context, which is dribble, pass, shoot, space the floor, drive and kick basketball, make the defense rotate and work. And by the way, yes, we have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's one of the 3 or 4 best players in the world right now. The Thunder are just stacked and loaded with talent. Kyle Kuzma would be a really nice addition for them. You turn Giddey out of the roster. You get another guy who can rebound for his position pretty well in Kyle Kuzma. I think it solves some of their issues, not all of them, but some of them, and at least helps in ways that they need to find improvements in, which is why I think this trade makes some sense. But our final deal is going to revolve around these two teams with a third team in here. And this is the big if. This is one trade that I almost guarantee will not happen on draft night. But I wanted to talk about it because this is the one that solves all of OKC's problems. Not only are you getting a big wing forward type, you're getting a giant one in Lauri Markkanen. And he is actually the perfect player for OKC. Over 80% of his baskets this past season for Utah, a team that didn't really even have a true point guard, lead floor general playmaker, decision maker, over 80% of Markkanen's baskets were assisted. He is a player who is elite off the catch, plays without the ball extremely well. His pick and pop game is, of course, deadly, and he was really the focal point for the Utah Jazz offense. Now in OKC, he's not going to be as much of the focal point, but I think with the way that they play, he slots in perfectly to fitting off of guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren, and at 7 feet tall, he provides a little bit of that rim protection that I think they could still use around Chet Holmgren. He provides some of that important defensive rebounding that they could use without jeopardizing or sacrificing any of their offensive style or scheme, or even their defensive scheme. This gives J-Dub the flexibility to not have to guard power forwards as much. I think you're going to be able to maximize your wing talent a little bit more with Lauri Markkanen's reliability as a shooter, one of the better shooting big men in the entire association. This just makes a ton of sense. The Wizards still get Josh Giddey in here, but at this rate, instead of trading him for Kyle Kuzma and also getting a pick with him, you give up pick 26 for Giddey, which I think is still, even though Giddey has some concerns, some problems, I do think it is a worthwhile decision for the Wizards. You get a point guard with starting experience, former lottery pick for pick number 26 in this draft. I do think that is worthwhile given their context and team situation. The Utah Jazz get a collection of young pieces and a ton of draft picks. Let's count them here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 first-round picks for Lauri Markkanen service. And you might say, well, that's absolutely insane, but I think the context of the picks matter. You're getting pick number 12. So you're not getting a top 10 pick in this year's draft already. That pick, it's valuable, but it's not like absurd value, okay? You're getting pick number 26 as part of that Giddey trade, right? So the Wizards send the pick to Utah. The Thunder end up getting the best player in the trade in Lauri Markkanen. So pick 26, that's not that valuable of a draft pick, but it's still a draft pick, right? Still a first-round pick. You're getting a 2026 first from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Not the most valuable pick. OKC projects to be a great team for a long time. That pick is likely going to be in the late 20s, just like it was this year. You're getting a 2027 first via Denver. So not an elite pick, not a super great pick. Maybe there's some potential if something goes wrong in Denver, whether it's an injury or their contracts, they just end up costing too much with all the quality talent that they have. But this is where you get some of the upside. Maybe a 2027 first from the Clippers could turn into something really, really good at the top of the draft, and a 2029 first from the Nuggets. So you never know how long Nikola Jokic is even going to want to play basketball. Maybe in 4 or 5 years, maybe contemplating retirement. Maybe Michael Porter Jr. is not there in Denver anymore. Maybe Jamal Murray's not there in Denver anymore. You never really know what's going to happen. I would say that 2027 Clippers first has the most value, the most upside, of course, and you get some young pieces in here too. Landry Shamet, not a young piece, but he shoots the ball well, could be at least a decent floor spacer for them, and he was essential in including so the Wizards could take in Josh Giddey's money. Ousmane Dieng, obviously we talked about him just recently, upside forward with ball handling capabilities. Utah could be one of the teams that affords to give him opportunities. You get Arkansas Jalen Williams, a player I like a lot. One of the best, smartest defensive players in the league. Constantly sets himself up to take charges. Just a high IQ player. Now, the skill set's not always there. The reliability as a jump shooter is not always there. He's not the best playmaker, but he's a pretty good one. I just think like Jalen Williams is just flat out a solid player who's going to have a long NBA career. Quality backup big man. Could kind of slot into the Kelly Olynyk role a little bit. Less playmaking, but a little bit more defensive nuance in his game. I think he could fit long-term in Utah given the length of the rebuild. You also get Aaron Wiggins, who was a huge glue guy for OKC. So even though the Thunder are getting the best player here, they are giving up some important pieces. Jalen Williams played a role for them this year. Aaron Wiggins was really essential for them at times, even in this postseason. So giving up those guys does hurt. Now, I think moving them for Lauri Markkanen makes all the sense in the world still. This is a no-brainer trade, in my opinion, for OKC. As we've seen, teams that step on the gas a little bit and try and get to the NBA Finals, they have a better chance of winning come postseason time. The Thunder have not operated that way yet. Maybe this is their window to do so before Holmgren, before Jalen Williams get expensive. This is your time to buy. You go out, get Lauri Markkanen, turn some of those first-round picks into real value on the court right now, and try and pursue winning a championship ASAP. Lauri Markkanen gets them closer to that. Aaron Wiggins, Ousmane Dieng, Jalen Williams gives Utah some long-term potential, some players that could really stick on that roster for a while. And one thing about this too, the Jazz, I think one flaw with the way that they're currently going about team building, having Lauri Markkanen on the roster makes you a little too good to really get a top 2 or 3 pick. Now, the Hawks did just jump up from number 10 to number 1 in this year's lottery. So maybe there's a world that Utah gets lucky in a lottery, but they haven't set themselves up for that chance yet. They haven't had, you know, a 14% chance or even a 10% chance at the number 1 overall pick. I think because of that, they're missing opportunities. So you sell a little bit now, your team gets quite a bit worse in the present version of itself, but you're setting yourself up to maybe lock in top 2, top 3 selections, and then from there you're really going to turn into a dangerous, dynamic team with all of the draft picks that they own, a lot of trade flexibility and ways to really improve this roster very quickly. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well. These were 8 trade structures, trade frameworks that I think could be worth building upon and for teams to really look at and try and figure out. Really appreciate each and every one of you. Again, let me know in the comment section below what was your favorite trade, which was your least favorite trade, what do you want to see happen on draft night, and we'll catch you guys in the very next Utility Sports video.